32 teams in 32 days. This is episode 27, the Kansas City Chiefs episode. Let's welcome in Joshua Brisco, host of the Arrowhead Report on Sports Illustrated. Joshua, what's going on?
I'm doing great, man. I've got a lot of things to talk about. We've got sort of this draft, this on-ramp that we've been on now for what feels like months. It's really been, it's been a couple months because it kind of started after the Super Bowl. And honestly, I'm very ready for the draft to just be here at this point.
Yeah, we're both in the state of Missouri right now. It's snowing. It was 70 degrees yesterday. Now it's snowing. Yep. It's crazy, but
I don't know how long you've been in the area, but I was born in Wichita and I've been in the Kansas City area since I was 10. And so at this point, you would think that the surprises would stop, and still, right now we're at the nice little apex of allergy season meeting winter, I guess, which is not what I wanted when I woke up today necessarily, but but I woke up today, and that's really what it's all about, is the optimism. You got to find the silver linings.
So I'm from California.
Oh no.
Yeah. So this is pretty different. But so the Chiefs came up a couple quarters short of doing something no team had done in almost 20 years. All in all, a great season. What did you make of the whole season, and how sickening was the ending for the fans, I guess?
Yeah, so it's zooming out and looking at the full season as a whole is honestly something that I think we probably should have been doing more of as of late. But it's really hard to get to a team that had just obviously won the Super Bowl the year before, and then you get back. Everything is about run it back. There's a whole run it back campaign. Everything is about getting back to the Super Bowl and winning it again. And so whenever you get to the Super Bowl and it's not even close, like it is a really gutting sort of loss that feels like it was over from pretty close to the opening kickoff. It makes it difficult to remember the fact that they were playing with significant losses, especially on the offensive line, and still had not just an incredible season, but a regular season that went so well that even with only one bye week for the first round of the playoffs, they were still able to rest their starters in week 17. Like, they had this thing wrapped up after 15 games. They were excellent. And still all of that gets washed away because of how the Super Bowl went. Not just the loss, but also the way that loss happened.
Yeah. And it's losing to a team that you beat earlier on the road, them coming back. The whole Bucs playoff run was all about redemption. They lost to the Saints twice and then beat them on the road. Obviously losing to Kansas City in a game that wasn't really close. But looking at Tom Brady's stats, it's interesting because he was a different quarterback after halftime of that Chiefs game. He was, I think, the number one rated quarterback in the league since halftime of that Chiefs game, the second half of that game, and then the last 6 or 7 games of the year, including the playoffs. He was on a different type of role. And that Bucs team, after their bye week, completely reshaped. They were playing so much better, and it's tough having to play a team, I guess, on the road twice in 1 year. The Chiefs kind of had to do that, going down to Tampa to play them in their own stadium. What did you think of having to do that? And before the game, before the kind of the offensive line got derailed, did you think it was a huge advantage for the Bucs?
The offensive line, or the fact that they had played already?
The fact that you had to go to Tampa in a supposedly neutral site game.
Right. It's funny because it was relatively close to being a neutral site game. The game was neutral site because we were also dealing with all the COVID, protocols and everything. But obviously the Bucs got to stay home that whole 2-week period, not have to worry about leaving their facilities or whatever. So I think that was obviously a legitimate advantage. In terms of them playing earlier in the season, that game was one of the reasons that I felt really confident about the Super Bowl going differently than it did. I've rarely been as wrong about something as I was about the specifics of the Super Bowl, because you're right. That game against the Bucs halfway through the season it ended up being a one possession game, but it never felt that close. The Buccaneers were playing catch up throughout the second half, and the defense was treating Brady differently, and the Chiefs offense was working differently. And it got closer than it should have, but it never really was within one possession of the Chiefs losing it all. It was always one possession away from being one possession away. The Bucs made it one possession and the game ended. Like, those were, and that's how a lot of the Chiefs, like the last chunk of their season went, by the way. There's a lot of talk about, they keep winning one possession games. Is that good enough? Whatever. Yeah, because most of those were kind of optical illusions. With that being said, all of that were additional reasons that I thought the Chiefs were clearly the better team here, even with the offensive line issues. So you lose Eric Fisher, the left tackle in the AFC Championship game, and we all knew that was going to be an issue. But also they had 2 weeks to prepare. And Mike Rimmers had been really good on the right side. So could he go on the left side and be competent? I figured he would be fine there. Andrew Wiley has some tackle experience. Him being plugged in at right tackle, I thought would be okay, given the fact that they could scheme for one game of this. They didn't have to get through a whole season with those guys, but they had to get through one game of it. And obviously they didn't. The guard play wasn't good. The Chiefs have added 1,000 guards this offseason. They haven't really addressed those tackle spots because they lost Fisher and Schwartz and released both of them. So the turnover there has certainly not yet been solidified, even as we sit here just a little ways away from the NFL draft. It's been a really strange, because again, we're talking about a team that lost one game in the regular season with their starters. They lost the Week 17 game when they played backups against the Chargers, but we're talking about a team that lost one regular season game and then lost one horrendous game in the Super Bowl, and they're having some pretty significant turnover this offseason, as opposed to last year's run it back offseason where the whole goal was just to just keep the band together. So it's provided a really interesting offseason for us.
Yep. And let's talk about that. You can tell when organizations are impatient. Mitchell Schwartz, Eric Fisher, arguably a top 3 right tackle and a very, very productive left tackle, both injured, both at the door. Fisher got injured later in the year. Mitchell Schwartz, you guys were playing without him for pretty much all of 2020. Here comes the reinforcements, right? Joe Tooney, largest contract by a guard ever. That pretty much came out of nowhere. There were no rumors that the Chiefs were heavily in on him, but they offer him a massive contract. He obviously accepts. How big was this signing, along with the expectation that at least one tackle is coming the weekend of April 29th?
So on Joe Tooney, for me, it's impossible to fully talk about Joe Tooney without also talking about Trent Williams. And if you go back to how this offensive line class of free agents panned out, I think you're right, by the way. There was not a whole lot of Joe Tooney to the Chiefs talk leading up to free agency. But there was some talk about Trent Williams, and then also Corey Linsley was the blue chip center from that class. Tooney was clearly the best guard. Trent Williams was clearly the best tackle available. Well, the Chiefs went and got Tooney, and then were down to the wire with the 49ers to try to get Trent Williams. That was also after they had signed Tooney. They were prepared to sign what would have been the 2 most expensive offensive linemen from that free agent class to play on the same side of their offensive line, which is a wild thing to even just think about. It's even stranger now that it didn't happen because of what hasn't happened following that. We'll get back to your second point there about what's going to happen coming up in a weekend. But bringing in Tooney, I think the logic is relatively clear. They wanted to get one of the 3 blue chip offensive linemen that were available in free agency. They thought, hey, we think we can raise the play of the guys on either side of Tooney. And with having him there at left guard, he's going to make the left tackle's job a little easier. He's going to make the center's job a little easier. They ended up flipping centers, Austin Ryder, free agent, bringing Austin Blythe, the former Rams center. Basically a wash for me. Not super. It's fine. Whatever. It's fine. Both of those guys were fine. But maybe, it'll improve the entire offensive line, so we'll spend the money on Tooney. All right, fair enough. I don't love the idea of spending a whole bunch of money on a guard. Generally speaking, I would rather have serviceable interior linemen and then maybe an elite left tackle, or if you got what the Chiefs had in their healthiest version last year, you had pretty good guard play, okay center play, a great right tackle, and a good left tackle. I'll take that offensive line, because typically my philosophy, and it's not my original philosophy, but philosophy that I've learned a variety of places, is that your offensive line is usually only going to be as strong as its weakest link is. The Chiefs' philosophy by bringing in Tooney was, hey, we're going to bring in one really strong link at maybe a less impactful position, and it's going to make the entire unit better. Will that pan out? I mean, it remains to be seen. I understand the logic, and also they did have cap space after moving on from Fisher and Schwartz, which were, by the way, both more about the injury than the money. That's something that you didn't say that wrong, but something that I've heard. They talk about cap casualties. Those guys were injury casualties who also had pretty major cap hits. So it's a little bit of both, but it's mostly the injuries for both of those guys, I think. So they go in on Tooney. They are almost in on Williams. Williams essentially gives the Niners a trade or a contract matching offer. The Niners keep matching it. Eventually the Chiefs bail. He signs with the Niners. All right, fine. Everything after that, though, has been even more wild because I would have bet anything that Riley Reif, who is gone, Alejandro Villanueva, who is a free agent but is apparently visiting the Ravens, which is strange. Russell Locum, still a free agent. A couple guys that I'm sure I've deleted their names from my mind because they ended up elsewhere. I would have bet anything that one of those veteran tackles was going to be on the Chiefs by draft time, so they weren't at a point where they're looking next year starting a rookie left tackle and a rookie right tackle and Lucas Niang, who opted out last season. Because I don't think you want to protect $500 million in your backfield with two dudes without an NFL snap at the edges. But it seems increasingly likely that that's a path the Chiefs are very, very probable to end up taking. I don't think it's locked in yet, but it's certainly looking that way, which would have been a huge stunner to me a month ago.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the drafts in a little bit, but it's interesting towards the beginning of what you were saying about, you know, all that money that Tooney got, the money that Williams got. It would have been your left tackle having, I think Williams got the highest left tackle or tackle contract ever. I'm pretty sure he broke Ronnie Stanley's deal, which signed 3-4 months ago. And then obviously Tooney, the most for a guard. So a team that made the Super Bowl has a $400+ million quarterback, a $100+ edge rusher, or I guess interior line, Chris Jones. You would call
both of them, but Jones and Clark both have huge deals. Yep.
All this financial commitment with the cap's a myth. It doesn't exist.
Yeah,
like how are they like that's like just the fact that they were able to offer him that and he was able to accept. He didn't. He took not the discount. He took the same deal with San Francisco. He wanted to run it back with them because I mean he got traded from Washington and loved being in San Francisco. And he was great last year and he helped them so much. But the possibility that was allowed, like that was going to be allowed to have the highest left tackle ever and the highest left guard ever playing on the same side of the line for a team that won 17 games last year or 16.
16.
16
I had to do the math,
but
yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. 6. That's ridiculous. But
they're also doing it with one of the most expensive safeties in football.
Yeah.
With one of the most expensive receivers in football. One of the most expensive linebackers in football. Now the counter to that I think is that you get far enough down the roster and maybe they're not quite as deep as a bunch of other teams would be. And whenever you do have guys like Schwartz and Fisher both getting hurt, you're not likely to have the most premium backups behind them. But the counterpoint to that is that Mike Rimmers might have been the best backup right tackle in football last year, and the Chiefs had him also. So yeah, if you're able to know how to move money down the line, and then also the cap went down this offseason, which never happens. It is a fascinating little peek into how the salary cap works and how quietly flexible it really is.
I say this all the time. I think that the Patriots were the first team to truly realize that, okay, this thing doesn't really exist. And then everyone kind of tagged along. And now that the cap went down, people are realizing, okay, we can maneuver this pretty easily. Like, I know it's down $25 million, but we can maneuver this pretty easily. We can restructure all these guys. Vikings can restructure Anthony Barr, Anthony Harris, these players and still have cap space to sign mega guys. And like so many restructures happened, and there are only a couple teams, my Bengals are one of them, who just don't restructure contracts. I'm like, what are you doing? It's so easy. Like, why aren't you doing this? But I feel like the Patriots were the first team to realize that. They won six Super Bowls doing it that way. And then the teams kind of tagged along. And now it's this era of restructures. You might have 3 years left on your deal and you might be gone, tomorrow.
Because the only real money is guaranteed money. Even with the Patriots, they had the advantage of being able to underpay Tom Brady for that whole stretch of time. Like, he was just taking less money. We had a really interesting article up on Arrowhead Report a couple of weeks ago now about Patrick Mahomes' contract. He is not underpaid on a year-to-year basis, but the structure of his deal is such that you might say, okay, well, so fine, they restructured his deal, but next year no, it's not. Well, next year no, it's not. It's like 6 years from now, his cap hit would finally, if they restructured the max every year, it's literally 5 or 6 years down the line before his deal would actually have a higher number than its original form did. And by that point, they're probably going to extend him again and they'll do it all over again. Like, so yeah, in 2035, maybe Patrick Mahomes will be paid more than he's worth, but we're literally talking about doing that 10 or 15 years from now.
So what you're saying is they're going to extend him again, and then kind of so the guaranteed money that is there in 5-6 years, that'll just be placed later on.
Yeah, so they have those rolling guaranteed mechanisms, the phrase that a
Uh-huh.
lot of us learned when that contract was signed. And so it'll in fact, I might be able to find the story, but essentially they can restructure every year and it'll move a good chunk, like $8-10 million or whatever, to the next. It'll spread it out over the next 5 years, which is how much you can spread a prorated roster bonus. They can convert salary to roster bonus. It'll spread out over the next 5 years. Well, so you spread over 5 years and 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 5 years. Eventually you end up getting to that point 5 or 6 years into the future where you do have that money overlapping and ultimately increasing the cost of the deal. But yeah, at that point, let's say that's 6 or 7 years into his extension, they're coming up with 3 or 4 years left on the end of that deal. They're probably talking about another multi-year extension beyond that. And they can just say, all right, well, we're not really going to tear up the last deal, but we're going to have all the notes from that. And we're going to just restructure it from here, where your cap hit this year is actually going to be way lower. And then ultimately he'll retire and they'll keep paying him with voidable years. The Steelers just did that with Ben Roethlisberger, I think, where they extended him for another year, but his deal, I think, is actually stretched out over 3 or 4 years. The Chiefs might just basically have the Bobby Bonilla deal where like he gets $1 million every year for like 40 years or whatever it was. But yeah, they're going to continue to be
Going on.
It's still happening. It's incredible. They'll be able to stay really flexible with Mahomes' contract, which is going to be a bit of an additional salary cap cheat code.
Yep. So they bring in Duran Reed, a surprise release from Seattle, and a guy who had a huge market. Obviously, he wants to win a Super Bowl. What did you make of this move?
I thought it was interesting because the Chiefs' 3 biggest needs this offseason were clearly, for me, tackle, edge, and receiver, probably in that order. Reed's an interior defensive lineman. He can move around a little bit, but he's not Chris Jones, but he might make Chris Jones a little more flexible. So I think that maybe is the most interesting ramification of it all, is that on first or second down, if you want to have Chris Jones play on the edge, he's wanted to do. It's not his best work, so I'm not like freaking out of excitement on that possibility. I'm probably a little more lukewarm on it than most, I think. But maybe you have Chris Jones being able to rotate in an edge in addition to playing on the interior. And then on third downs or obvious passing downs, you have Chris Jones kick back inside, and then Taco Charlton or maybe a drafted edge rusher would step in at the edge spot opposite Frank Clark. And you could have Reed, Jones, Clark, and Taco, or Reed, Jones, Clark, and Jason Owe or something on the other side and trying to get after the quarterback. That's a pretty good front four. I'll be really interested to see how they specifically use Reed, though, because I mean, that's kind of a cop-out, but that's whenever I'll know how I feel about them making that move. It's a 1-year deal. It takes up a decent little chunk of cap space. He ends up sneakily being I think he's the 7th highest cap hit or something on the Chiefs right now, which is kind of funny. But it's because he's on a 1-year deal, and you can't restructure a 1-year deal immediately, and you can't move all that money. You can't prorate that roster bonus. So I think it's fine. I don't think it'll fundamentally change the Chiefs' ceiling, but it's a piece that you'd like to have in the interior, so I'm fine with that.
Yep. So let's kind of move into this. The last quarterback not named Tom Brady or Peyton Manning to have lost a Super Bowl, then returned to one at any point in their career, was Kurt Warner, who did it 9 years apart with a different team. Going back further, the last quarterback to do it before that was John Elway, who did it in the 80s. It's extremely hard to keep teams together, and when that window closes, it really, really closes. So for everyone who expects the Chiefs to win a handful of Super Bowls, not quite sure how realistic that is. Like, I know they should have gone out 3 years in a row. They've gone the last 2 years. But what is your take on that? Because history shows that it's very challenging to keep going back to Super Bowls.
Yeah, so this is I like this question because this is actually something that I talked to Greg Bishop from Sports Illustrated, which also covers the Arrowhead Report. The Arrowhead Report is under that umbrella. But I talked to him about it on my radio show here on Sports Radio 810 here in Kansas City around the Super Bowl, because he wrote a story about how hard it is for teams to lose the Super Bowl and then get back the next year, how infrequently that happens, all of that. And the thing that he said that kind of made me go like, oh, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Why are we overthinking this? Is the fact that it's really hard for any team to get to a Super Bowl. It's hard for a team to get back-to-back if they win it. It's hard for a team to get back again or even back in the playoffs, right, if they lose the Super Bowl. The thing there is it's not – you don't see a decreased rate of success from a losing Super Bowl team than you would from any other team essentially thrown into a generic season simulator. The reason that it's so hard, I think largely we see a pattern there that is ultimately just reflective of how difficult the league is, how much parity there is in football. Where, yeah, I mean, the Patriots did it. They ended up back to the Super Bowl a million times. They even had a decade in the middle where they didn't win one. So, yeah, it is simply, I don't think there's a curse, and I don't think that the Chiefs are going to miss the playoffs because they lost the Super Bowl last year. It's just really, 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 really hard to have that level of success. And it's even harder by an order of magnitude to have that success repeated years in a row. I think more than anything else, though, that's about roster turnover. It's about the attrition that comes with injuries. It's about if you're a team that gets there with a young quarterback on a rookie contract, which is the best cheat code in the sport, the best thing you can have. The two best things you can have in football are an elite quarterback who's paid like one and a really, really good quarterback who's not paid that well yet. The Chiefs have gone from having the latter to having the former. Patrick Mahomes is going to end up carrying his cap hit that is pretty equivalent to his value, but he's got to perform at that level. He's going to, because he's great at football. But if you have teams that are doing it on a rookie contract, well, then whenever you pay Joe Flacco, your roster construction gets a lot more difficult. It's not because of Joe Flacco's contract. It's because you gave Joe Flacco that contract. And so your ceiling ultimately lowers and your margin of error narrows. So I think we see a lot of pretty logical consequences of the choices that teams make and how all of that flows together into what ends up appearing like a curse or whatever in terms of teams who lose the Super Bowl making it back. In terms of just winning multiple rings over the course of a decade, it's just really, really difficult. The biggest thing, though, is that the Chiefs have the best quarterback in football. So that's why I think they are going to be able to win multiple rings with Patrick Mahomes. Are they going to win it all next year? The odds are no, right? Like if you say pick a team that's going to win the Super Bowl next year, I'd say, all right, I'll put my $10 on the Chiefs. But if you said the Chiefs or the field, every single person on the planet would say, I'll take the field. That's the nature of how this sport works. And it's also the reason that we love this sport so much, because that kind of not quite randomness, but that volatility is really exciting and it makes for great theater.
And you mentioned the bad decisions that teams make that kind of can derail them. We also see all the time the consequences of what happens. We saw the Panthers, make Super Bowl. Cam Newton's no longer on the team. Eagles, right. Foles and Wentz no longer on the team. Rams, Jared Goff not on the team. Falcons, we don't know what they're doing with their roster's a mess right now, right? And the Niners look like they're going to run it back one more year and then say, okay, Jimmy G, you go off somewhere else. So like, especially in the NFC teams, like all these teams who have either faced Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, the guys who have gone back after multiple losses. So we see the consequences of how the rosters are built, and we're seeing it finally with New England once Tom Brady leaves after they don't win a Super Bowl. Now we're seeing it with them. So with the Chiefs, you make a great point. If the reason that Mahomes can go back multiple times, and he already is because he is in that conversation with Brady and Manning. He is that good. He's not on the Brady track, but he is that good, and that's probably why he's going to keep going back. I say this all the time. He's not Dan Marino, because Dan Marino went to Super Bowl his rookie year and never went back. Mahomes has already won one and went back again. So it's certainly a fun discussion because they've gone back. They've already gone back. They already have one, and he's only 25. So that's the thing. So
like you think about it again. You touched on it already, but all those teams you mentioned, where are the Falcons now? Where are the Eagles now? Where are the Rams now? The reason that those teams are the failure stories, even as the Eagles obviously won theirs, right? The reason that those teams are looked at now as being in shambles, despite being in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, 4 years ago for each of those teams, it's because they went up against the monolith quarterback, against the guy who's going to be the guys who are going to be top 5 quarterback conversations when their careers are over. So yes, I'm saying Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. I'm saying Patrick Mahomes because I believe that. But like whenever the issue isn't that those teams weren't actually good, but they were. That Eagles team was super talented, was fantastic to the point they were able to win it with Nick Foles. Like that's and like you said, both of those guys are gone now. Nick Foles is a scrap heap quarterback, and Carson Wentz is a reclamation project. Matt Ryan is washed. I don't think he's actually, that's an exaggeration, but Matt Ryan's out of our heads for the most part now. Jared Goff is in Detroit. those teams, for various reasons across all of them, were able to make it there. But you might be able to get the Niners as well. You might be able to get with an excellent roster and great roster construction and great planning and great execution and some good luck. You can get to a Super Bowl, and of course, once you get there, you can win it. You can win a Super Bowl doing everything right, but to win multiple Super Bowls, you have to have the quarterback. It's non-negotiable. You're never going to see Nick Foles winning multiple rings as a starting quarterback. It was going to be, this team is excellent. We're able to function on all these levels, but ultimately we're going to see the teams on the AFC side with the quarterbacks. They're going to be the teams that repeat over and over and over again. And again, that's why I think the Chiefs are going to stay in that conversation.
I guess the one outlier there, it would be Eli Manning, who is 2-0. Both those wins coming against Tom Brady. Like, yeah, maybe Flacco. And obviously I didn't mention Colin Kaepernick went to a Super Bowl, was a couple years after, was just not the same. And then is out of the league. But Flacco won one and then never went back. So he's 1-0. Yeah. But the one outlier is Eli, because he won one, went back, won again. So that's why I'm the one outlier. I'm like, how did Eli Manning beat Tom Brady twice in a Super Bowl? How did he beat the then 18-0 Patriots?
Yeah. Well, so I'm pulling up the years now, because I'm trying to figure out when his contracts all ended up hitting at different points, because it's kind of funny. I think 2007 would have been right at the end of his rookie deal, I think. And I'm not sure what, like, his
well, that Giants team was a wild card team. So
yeah, and he was a rookie in 2004. Okay. But yeah, anyway, you're right. And those also, you get two that are spread out by a decent chunk of years there, 2007 and 2011. Mm-hmm. But you also, this is the kind of the funny thing, if you look at his playoff records, outside of those 2 years, there are 2 years where they won 4 games, including the Super Bowl. Every other year that he made the playoffs, which was not that frequent, they were out in the first round. He was 0-1, 0-1, 4-0, 0-1, 4-0, 0-1. And that's over the course of a long career. I think for him, that's more an issue than anything else of being within that first category in his first year, where he was good enough and young enough with a great team around him. And then that second appearance later on is the stars aligning once again over the course of a large enough sample size where you can get a singular example over the course of the last 25 years or whatever of modern football. You know what? Flacco was one and done. Goff was one and done. And really, it's those Ravens teams, that Rams team, etc. But that Giants team, they actually built it up twice and did it despite not having one of those elite quarterbacks, which there's probably an argument to be made that it's the most impressive thing that's happened in football over the last 20 years, because they were doing it with Eli Manning, and there were a lot of dark years around there, but they did end up doing it twice. You're right.
Yep. So let's talk about the draft. The Chiefs are picking at 31, 63, 94, 136, and 144. 5 picks in the first 4 rounds. Let's just talk about this. 2 holes at tackle. We'll see. We don't know what you're going to get out of Lucas Niang, like you said. But look, let's go with there's 2 fillable gaps in the 2 tackle spots. How would you go about fixing that? And what do you think that they're thinking? Because you talked about them not bringing in a veteran, Riley Reef, obviously in Cincinnati, and all those other guys that are now blanking.
It's a long list of dudes who none of them are here. Yeah, that's true. So here's where I'm at with 31 in particular. There are 4 guys at the top of the draft. You've got Sewell, Slater, and Darisaw that are pretty clearly 1, 2, and 3, pretty clearly in that order. You might get a little bit of an argument about Tevin Jenkins, who would be the 4th guy. I'm not even bringing in Vera Tucker. I think he's probably a guard. So you have those 4 guys. Any of those 4 guys, I think, could actually start at left tackle week 1 next year, and it would be fine. It would just be I think it would work out okay. You would still love to have a veteran in my mind, because if it doesn't go that well, then you have a chance to tag them out at training camp and go, oh, yikes, maybe Tevin Jenkins wasn't as ready as we thought he was going to be. It's a tough move from college to the pros, and a lot of these guys that we'll talk about had spent time at right tackle. A lot of these guys have shorter arms than your average Andy Reid tackle prospect has. So they've all got issues somewhere along the lines. But if you told me, hey, you can get, it won't be Sewell or Slater, obviously, and it almost certainly won't be Darisaw. But let's say Tevin Jenkins falls to 31, push the button, deal, let's do it. And then I think he starts at left tackle day one. I think right tackle is going to be Lucas Niang or Mike Rimmers. What I'll be nervous about is if it ends up being Niang at left tackle, Rimmers at right tackle. Also, it gets very thin behind them, so I don't love that. But I do think right tackle is pretty much set to go. If they end up finding a left tackle, if it gets shuffled around, it'll be more because of what they didn't get as opposed to what they have on the right side. I think right side's at least good right now. But then you get to the class of Samuel Cosmi, Alex Leatherwood, Jalen Mayfield, Liam Eichenberg, Dylan Redunz, Walker Little, Jackson Carman. Those are all guys that I'm just looking at a big board right now that end up showing up from 32 to 65. They're pretty clearly that there's a big chunk there. And if you wanted to argue Cosmi was up a tier, you could. For me, though, especially in something that is as much of a crapshoot as the NFL draft is, it's a science, but it's an inexact one. So if you're going to give me a choice at 31 and Jenkins and those other guys are gone at the top, I'm going to take the best player on the board. If Rashad Bateman, the receiver from Minnesota, is there, I'm going to do it. I will take him. If Steve Spagnuolo thinks he can make Jason Owe a legit Pro Bowl caliber edge with some development, I'll take it. That's fine. I would rather have one of those guys at 31 than just the best tackle on your board, because the best tackle on your board might be Cosmi. And is Cosmi significantly better out of the gate than Liam Eichenberg? Maybe, and maybe not. And that's the draft. So my hope would be that of the, let's see, Cosmi, Leatherwood, Mayfield, Eichenberg, Redunz, Little, Carman, of those 7 guys, maybe Brady Christensen of BYU, if you want to, that's Spencer Brown. Even I saw Spencer Brown go way higher than I expected in the mock recently.
He's going to.
So if whoever it is, I mean, the dude's 6'8". It's very alluring. If you find one of those guys at 63, if you told me that Spencer Brown's going to be better than Samuel Cosmi, I'd say, I mean, yeah, sure. There's a 40% chance I think that, but that's pretty close. If I get one of those guys at 63 and then take the best player available at 61, that's what I would do. I think there's a very real chance the Chiefs are not picking at 31. The Chiefs are picking at 21 because Tevin Jenkins got just past the Bears or whoever, and maybe they move up to lock that down. Brett Veach loves a trade up. But that's where my head's at right now. Very, very few things would genuinely surprise me. In the first round, I think they'll take an edge, a receiver, or a tackle, probably tackle, edge, receiver in order. But it wouldn't hurt my feelings at all if they get to 31 and maybe those 4 guys and Cosmi. Please, no running backs though. If they take a running back, you're never going to hear from me again.
So looking at the roster, you mentioned edge, a little bit of a need at receiver with the sending away of Sammy Watkins. Where else do you see holes? This is a team that felt so confident in the roster last year that they took a running back in the first round.
They sure did. Thank you for bringing that up again, because they sure did. I think I interrupted you. I wish they wouldn't have done that. I don't know if you can tell, but I wish they wouldn't have done that.
So where else do you see holes in the roster?
Running back, I think, would be important. No, I do think that it's pretty clearly there. I think there are 4 spots pretty clearly. And it's the 3 that I mentioned already. Because here's the thing on edge, real quick. I'll give you a quick synopsis of all of them. Tackle, we've covered. Receiver, pretty much covered it. They were in on Juju Smith-Schuster very heavily. Andy Reid was basically sexting him, sending him pictures of the Lombardi Trophy, saying, "Hey, Juju, you want to get a little piece of this Lombardi Trophy? Come to Kansas City." They were very in on him. They were very in on a couple of other receivers that landed elsewhere. They really do want to add another weapon. I think that's very legitimate. This receiver class is stupid deep, though, at this point. So, if they don't take a receiver in the first 2 or 3 rounds, I think they might have a legit role player in round 4 because that's how deep this class is. But the thing with edge is that right now their second edge rusher is Taco Charlton or Mike Dana. Both fine rotational pieces, good rotational pieces even, but I'd rather have them be your 3 and 4 than your 2 and 3 guys, with Frank Clark being the obvious one. The other issue there is that Frank Clark really underperformed last year. And after this season, the Chiefs could move on from him if they wanted to with a reasonable dead cap hit. So not only do I think that it could be beneficial this year to have another, long explosive athlete on the other side from Clark, he might end up being the Clark replacement next year and they continue to add edges. Would not surprise me at all if they go there very early, and it would not hurt my feelings. The 4th spot is at center. Because they did let Austin Ryder go. They did bring in Austin Blythe. It's a 1-year deal. He's making the vet minimum or super close to it. It's less than the compensatory formula. It doesn't even trigger that. So I could see them also adding a center somewhere in the first 3 rounds, round 4, whatever. They say, hey, we want you under your rookie deal to be in front of Patrick Mahomes for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I think that would also, that's sort of my sleeper of the 4 spots. If they take anywhere else, they're kind of thin at linebacker, but I don't think they can spend a high draft pick at linebacker again this year, because they've invested at linebacker, just hasn't really shown out yet.
Yeah, and you mentioned linebacker Willie Gay. I liked the pick last year. Some flashes, and we'll see what he can do. He was one of those late risers in like March and April, and like, okay, this guy's now a second, third round pick, and I'm like, okay. But yeah, and so what I'm hearing from you is you think that they're probably going to trade up, or they might. It's on their minds.
It's always on Brett Veach's mind. Trading up is always on Brett Veach's mind.
If they do trade up, say they're picking at 2021, I think both Jenkins and Bateman will be there, not past 23 or 24. I think Bears, Titans, those teams, Colts are all over both those prospects. So let's say they jump all the move to 20 or 19. The Colts are at 20. So would you want Jenkins or Bateman? What's your ideal?
I think if they trade up, it would be for a tackle, I think. But I've also been wrong about Brett Veach. Trying to guess Brett Veach's moves. I mean, literally every year, I think I've been confused on some level by his top pick. Like even trading up from Cole Hardman, it was like, oh, well, all right, I guess DK Metcalf really can't play football. And then now we're here like, oh, well, that didn't work. I think if they trade up, it would be for Jenkins. I would not. And if they do think that Jenkins is that quality of player, that would be fine with me. It would also make me very sad if Rashad Bateman was on the board and they didn't take him. If they had a chance, if he goes 18 or something, fine. The other thing is, if we even end up talking about Terrace Marshall Jr. somewhere around that 31st pick, I would be interested. I think the Chiefs would be too. But I think if they move up, I think it's because the first 3 tackles have gone and they want to get tackle number 4, which would most likely be Jenkins.
Yep. Awesome. Great stuff. Thanks so much for coming on, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Make sure to follow him on Twitter at JB Brisco. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening to this episode of 32 Teams in 32 Days, and I will catch you in the next one.